The day my own sister grabbed my $5 million check, laughed in my face, and ripped it into tiny pieces in front of my 8-year-old son, I thought the humiliation couldn't get any worse. Then she pointed at my uniform, called me a washed-up military failure, and told bank security to throw me out before I embarrass the family again. My son squeezed my hand so tightly I could barely feel my fingers. Try not to cry as strangers stared at us. My sister stood there smiling, convinced she'd won. She had no idea that the torn check wasn't the most valuable thing I carried into that bank that morning. 30 seconds later, the branch manager came running into the lobby, stopped dead in his tracks, snapped to attention, looked straight at me, and quietly said one word that drained every bit of confidence from my sister's face. "Colonel. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 29 years old, a U.S. Army colonel, and the proud mother of an 8-year-old boy named Ethan. I've spent my adult life leading soldiers through demanding assignments, making difficult decisions under pressure, and earning every promotion through discipline and hard work. Yet somehow none of that ever impressed my family. To them, I was simply the younger sister who had chosen the military instead of a real career. My older sister, Rebecca, never missed an opportunity to remind me of that. She worked as a senior client advisor at one of the largest banks in our city, and loved introducing herself by her job title. At every family gathering, she'd joke that she handled real money while I only collected government paychecks. I usually smiled and changed the subject. Not because I agreed with her, because arguing never changed anyone's opinion. A year earlier, I'd quietly invested in a small technology company founded by a fellow military veteran. Against everyone's expectations, the business grew rapidly before being acquired by a larger firm. After the sale was completed through every proper legal and financial process, my share of the proceeds came to just over $5 million. The bank issued the official cashier's check, and all I needed to do was deposit it into my investment account. Since Ethan had the day off from school, I decided to take him with me. I thought it would be a simple lesson about responsibility and planning. I had absolutely no idea we were about to walk into the most unforgettable day of our lives. Ethan and I walked into the bank just before 10 o'clock that morning. He held my hand with one hand and carried a small notebook in the other. I'd promised to teach him how banks worked and why saving money was important. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Well, look who finally showed up." Rebecca stepped out from behind one of the service desks, wearing her name badge and a smile that wasn't friendly. She glanced at my uniform before looking down at the envelope in my hands. "What's this?" she asked loudly enough for half the lobby to hear. "Just some banking business," I answered calmly. She laughed. "You banking business?" Without waiting for permission, she snatched the envelope from my hands and pulled out the cashier's check. Her eyes widened for a split second when she saw the amount. Then she burst into laughter. $5 million? Olivia, this has to be a joke." Several customers turned to watch. I reached for the check. "Rebecca, please give it back." Instead, she held it above her head. "You actually expect this bank to believe someone like you walked in carrying $5 million? Before I could respond, she tore the check straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the silent lobby. Ethan gasped. I felt his small hand tighten around mine. Rebecca dropped the torn pieces onto the counter. "This is obviously fake," she announced. "Security, could someone please escort these people out before they cause a scene?" 2 security guards began walking toward us. Around us, customers whispered while Ethan looked up at me with frightened eyes. I simply took a slow breath and stayed exactly where I was. The security guard stopped a few feet away. Neither of them touched us. One politely asked if there was a problem. Before I could answer, Rebecca pointed at the torn pieces of the cashier's check scattered across the counter. "She's trying to deposit a fake $5 million check," she declared. "Please escort them outside." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. One of them reached for his radio. Just then, the branch manager hurried out of a nearby office after hearing the commotion. His eyes moved across the lobby. They landed on me. For a brief moment, he looked confused. Then recognition replaced surprise. He walked directly past Rebecca without saying a word. When he stopped in front of me, he straightened his posture, extended his hand, and smiled. "Good morning, Colonel Bennett." The entire lobby went silent. Rebecca blinked. "What did you just call her?" The manager ignored the question. "It's an honor to see you again, Colonel. We met at the Veterans Leadership Scholarship ceremony last year." I remembered him immediately. His bank had sponsored educational grants for military families, and we'd spoken after the event about financial planning for service members transitioning into civilian careers. "It's good to see you again," I replied. His smile disappeared as he noticed the torn pieces of the cashier's check. "What happened here?" Rebecca quickly stepped forward. "I was protecting the bank from fraud." The manager didn't answer. Instead, he carefully picked up both halves of the check and examined them. His expression grew serious. He looked toward the security guards. "No one is leaving." Then he turned to Rebecca. "And no one says another word until we verify exactly what happened." For the first time that morning, my sister looked genuinely nervous. She was beginning to realize she might have made a very expensive mistake. The branch manager carried the torn pieces of the cashier's check into his office with extraordinary care. He invited Ethan and me to follow him while another employee asked Rebecca to remain outside. She protested immediately. "I work here. I have every right to be in that office." The manager shook his head. "Not during this review." For the first time in years, my sister wasn't the one in control. Inside the office, the manager apologized for what had happened and contacted the bank's verification department. Even though the paper had been torn, every security feature and serial number could still be confirmed through official records. The waiting felt longer than it really was. Ethan sat quietly beside me. I smiled at him. "It's going to be okay." A few minutes later, the manager's phone rang. He listened carefully before thanking the person on the other end. When he hung up, he looked directly at me. "Colonel Bennett, the check has been fully verified. The funds are legitimate and everything matches our records." I simply nodded. I expected as much. Outside the office, Rebecca's voice grew louder as she insisted she had only been protecting the bank. The manager reviewed the lobby security footage. The video clearly showed her taking the check from my hands without permission before tearing it apart herself. There was no confusion. No misunderstanding. Only facts. Several employees quietly admitted this wasn't the first time Rebecca had spoken disrespectfully to customers she assumed were unimportant. The manager thanked them for their honesty and documented every statement. Then he picked up the telephone once more. This time he called the bank's regional director. "I believe you'll want to be present for this matter," he said calmly. As he ended the call, he turned to me. "Colonel Bennett, on behalf of this branch, I'm truly sorry." I looked through the office window at my son. The most valuable thing walking out of that bank wouldn't be the money. It would be the example he had just witnessed. Less than 30 minutes later, the regional director arrived at the branch. He didn't begin by asking about the money. He asked to see the security footage. Every minute of it. The video showed exactly what everyone had witnessed. Rebecca had taken the cashier's check from my hands without permission, mocked me in front of customers, and torn it apart before any verification had even begun. Then the witnesses were invited to speak. One customer explained how Ethan had stood silently beside me the entire time. Another described how I had never once raised my voice, even after being publicly embarrassed. An elderly gentleman looked at the regional director and said, "Your employee judged her before she knew a single fact." The room fell quiet. The director thanked everyone for their honesty before turning to me. "Colonel Bennett, I offer my sincere apology to both you and your son. This should never have happened inside one of our branches." I appreciated his professionalism. "Thank you," I replied. I only wanted fairness. He nodded. And that's exactly what you'll receive. While another employee completed the paperwork to replace the damaged cashier's check through the bank's official procedures, Ethan tugged gently on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't you yell when Aunt Rebecca was being mean?" I smiled. Because people are always watching how we respond, especially when things are difficult. He thought about that for a moment before smiling back. "I think I understand." As we finished the deposit, I realized the money had never been the most important part of that day. The greatest investment I'd made was in the lesson my son had just learned. Respect is never demanded through pride. It's earned through character. A few weeks later, the bank completed its internal review. The regional director personally called to let me know the investigation had concluded and that appropriate workplace action had been taken according to the bank's policies. He couldn't discuss every detail, but he assured me that what had happened to Ethan and me would not be ignored. That was enough for me. I had never wanted revenge. I wanted accountability. As Ethan and I drove home, he stared out the window for a long moment before asking the question I knew had been on his mind. "Mom, weren't you angry?" I smiled. "Of course I was." "Then why didn't you argue?" I glanced at him before turning back to the road. "Because leadership isn't about proving you're the loudest person in the room. It's about making the right decision even when emotions tell you otherwise." He nodded slowly. "So staying calm was stronger than shouting?" "Exactly." When we reached home, Ethan wrapped his arms around me. "I'm proud you're my mom." Those 6 words meant more than any investment, promotion, or recognition I'd ever received. The money would help secure our future, but the lesson my son carried home that day was worth far more. Character can't be torn apart like a piece of paper. When it's built on honesty, patience, and integrity, it only grows stronger under pressure. That Saturday, Ethan and I spent the afternoon at our favorite park with nothing more complicated than sandwiches, a football, and time together. As we watched the sun begin to set, he looked up at me and smiled. "You know what I'll remember about the bank?" I laughed softly. "The $5." He shook his head. "No. That you stayed kind when it would have been easier to be angry." His words stopped me for a moment. Out of everything that had happened, that was the lesson he chose to carry with him. The money would help build our future, but it could never compare to that. If this story taught me anything, it's that people may judge your appearance, your career, or your circumstances before they know the truth. But character has a way of revealing itself when the pressure is greatest. And in the end, the greatest wealth I could ever leave my son wasn't money. It was the example of integrity.